The 6 to 7 Figure Show, episode 32. Let's hit it.
Broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun outside Phoenix, Arizona. This is the 6 to 7 Figure Show. Tired of working so hard and having no time? Take your six-figure practice and turn it to a thriving seven-figure enterprise. And now, your host, author, speaker, mentor, and strategist, Frank Bria.
Welcome, everyone, to the 6 to 7 Figure Show. I'm your host, Frank Bria, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Daniel Thomas Hind, who is the founder and CEO of EvolutionEat, a transformational health coaching company. He works with high performers sort of master their diets, build healthy eating habits that basically that last forever. This is the idea is to create permanent transformation. He's a student of self-mastery, world-class coach, serial entrepreneur. Daniel's helped hundreds of entrepreneurs become peak performers while also building and selling a number of businesses over his career. So thanks for joining us, Daniel. Absolutely thrilled to have you.
Frank, man, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, pleasure's all mine. So there's this interesting connection in your background between the healthy diet and eating and peak performance. I mean, obviously these two things are related, but can you kind of connect the dots for us? Why are these two things like core principles for you?
Well, you can't be a peak performer without being healthy. And you can't be healthy without having a healthy relationship with food, which, whether we want to look at it or not, this culture, that is our entire nation and all of the West, this society, I should say, has a very loaded relationship with food, whereby we're more often eating not because we're hungry, but for all of these other reasons, right? Some of them being, most of them being because we're emotional beings. We eat because we're feeling something.
Right.
And in this day and age, when we're overloaded with so much stress, so much coming at us at all times, so much stimulation, so much distraction. I mean, we live in a reactionary world where there's just so much happening all at once. We simply don't know how to process all of that energy. And therefore, we end up coping more often than not, more often than we would like to admit, by eating. Right? Either as a way to just like pause and give ourselves a break, or because we're stressed and because we're looking for that dopamine hit. A lot of this stuff goes back to childhood. We were shown love by being given food. For me, that's my story.
Yeah.
And so we resort to food to feel better or to fill some sort of emotional need, right? And or simply to mitigate stress, right? Yeah. Or to inject some sort of happiness or delight into our days. And so food addiction is the biggest addiction of them all. We all have it in some way, shape, or form because we literally have to eat all the time. So we're always focused on it. And because of the way that food is marketed to us, it's become out of control. And it's also, your drug of choice you can find right around the corner. It's ubiquitous. You can get it anywhere on your terms all the time. And now I can order it straight to my door without even moving an inch, right? So I look at our relationship with food and the way that we go about building habits around eating as a core principle in mastering yourself, given that we have to eat anyways, right? We have to eat all the time. So let's start looking at things that we have to do as human beings, no matter what, and make it a meta practice for becoming better in life, right? And so eating is so fundamental to life, and not to mention has such a dramatic impact on the way that we feel physiologically, emotionally, energetically, mentally, all of these things. It's a great place to start. And I guess the last piece I'll say about that is that I hope everybody's aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we need like a psychology 101 reboot, it's a theory that in order to self-actualize and perform at our very best, we need to fulfills certain innate human needs from in priority from the bottom up. And at the bottom of that ring is health, your health. So health is the bedrock of a meaningful and productive life. And that means that no matter how successful you are in other areas of life and business, there's no such thing as success without being successful with your health and constantly working on that. And like I said before, you can't be healthy unless you have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
That sets the foundation for the work that I do with just about anybody who I'm working with, whether it's with my company EvolutionEat or with whether I'm working, you know, in an intensive one-on-one way with an entrepreneur of some sort.
Yeah. You touched on something that I want to go back to because I think it's a really fascinating dynamic. I mean, fundamentally, the way, and I think most people can totally relate to the dynamic you described about using food for essentially for the wrong thing, right? So
yeah,
food,
there's so much complexity around eating, man. God, yeah, absolutely.
right. So it's interesting, this dynamic that you're using is sort of a meta principle that that mastering your diet and your health is about fundamentally finding the right use for the right tool. So as opposed to going to the wrong tool for the wrong thing. And what you're describing is that in peak performance, it seems this is the same principle. Fundamentally, in anything that we do, there are probably things that we're using the wrong tool for to get the wrong result. And it's self-defeating, or it's it's just energy draining or whatever. But fundamentally, this seems to be about self-mastery in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so, like, that context that you just described is so disempowering, right? Because you're using something that you think is going to make you feel better or be good for you, be beneficial, have a positive output, and it's not. It's actually designed to not do that, but you're not necessarily aware of that. So you're basically trapped inside of a box that has you starting the video, or inside of a video game in which you keep falling off the cliff and have to start over again.
Right.
You can't see. It's like you're the character in the video game that can only see so far ahead. You're not the player of the video game. And what I want to help you do is become the player in the video game. I mean, Ray Dalio talks a lot about this in his book Principles, about every action and decision that you make having a second and third and fourth order consequence. It's not just the first order consequences. There's a series of them.
Yeah.
And in that way, when you think about your actions and your choices, you can see that there's a whole string of things that happen. And when it comes to food or basic coping mechanisms that we take on, we're only thinking about our emotional needs in that moment itself. And if I can help you start thinking of sourcing yourself and making choices for yourself in life, no matter if it's eating or whatever, as the lead domino in a series of dominoes, then all of a sudden you can start to think more globally about what's going on and to understand that you are actually the video game player who can see ahead. You can see that the cliff is coming, so you better, power up or whatever, or find the bouncy thing that you can bounce over, to complete that degrading metaphor. But does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And like to kind of continue on that that train of thought, it seems like there's this element, this common element, because as I look at like I think about food and my relationship with food, right? Mm-hmm. There are clearly long-term or even medium-term, like not that far out impacts based on what food does. And yet our short-term decision-making seems completely misaligned with it. And we have such a hard time, I think, as human beings, like connecting these dots together where we can feel the medium-term impact. Like I can eat something, like I'll just give you a really good example. Like I love pizza. I love pizza with extra cheese. And it makes,
as a New Yorker and an Italian, I 100% understand
Yeah,
that. I'm a
exactly.
New Yorker transplanted to Los Angeles, so I
Right. And
get
I'm
it.
New Yorker and Italian too. So that's exactly it.
So we're
But
totally effed. We're
that's
totally.
right.
I don't know if I can curse on if this is friendly, family friendly. So
Oh,
I said effed.
it's I think we all are aligned with that. But
Yeah.
that stuff messes me up. It really does. It's bad, but I love it. And in that moment, it's like the thing that I want or crave. And it's not that far down the road. It's not more than a couple of hours before I can start to feel the physiological effects of that. But as a human being, it's really tough to connect those dots, but it feels like that's exactly the concept of pretty much anything. Like move over into productivity. The same thing's true. Like I can get onto social media and waste a bunch of time on Facebook, and that feels really good. And the medium term impact is that I don't get any of those projects done that I was supposed to today. But again, my brain's having a hard time connecting the dots between those two things. How do we fight against that impulse?
Well, it's really hard. So the first the first answer is it's really hard to fight that impulse in the moment itself.
Yeah.
So in order to offset that like heroic challenge, what I help my people do is create a whole lifestyle of health and empowerment so that you're not setting yourself up for those situations, so that you're instead more globally answering that question instead of relying on willpower to get you by, because willpower is no strategy at all. It's hit or miss. Some days you might be able to say, God, I'm not going to have the pizza, but most days you're going to say yes, right? Because we're physiologically, emotionally, mentally addicted to it. And we're also like extremely bent towards satisfying pleasures and relieving pain. Like those are our most primal needs.
Right.
So satisfying pleasure, stimulating pleasure, that goes way down to the reptilian cells. It completely defies the logic. So like my job is to help set you up for ultimate success so that you're not putting yourselves in those really challenging situations, right?
Yeah.
So and which is really hard for entrepreneurs, to make this specific to entrepreneurs for a second, because so many of us are addicted, not just addicted to things that help us cope and get by. Why do we do that? Well, because we're addicted to working and to hustling, to this hustling grind culture, right? That's taught us that in order to be successful, we need to sacrifice ourselves in some way, shape, or form. Right. And so like almost every highly successful entrepreneur and self-starter I know goes to great lengths to bend reality in their favor, often sacrificing basic human needs like their health and wellness to get ahead in their business or career. And like, this is what, this sort of hustle is what Gary Vee has popularized, and which we as a culture have, somewhat mistakenly glorified, but without making Gary Vee wrong or whatever. It's confusing because this works. All around us are examples of millionaires and billionaires who have burned the candles at both ends in their early days, like sleeping under their desks and surviving on ramen noodles and Monster energy drinks. And it works. It works to get ahead. It works, and it gets you ahead when you will yourself into a whole new level of productivity and output and energy and focus on something. But there's a cost to it. There's a cost to it, and that's more often than not yourself. Because in order to sustain that impossible work schedule and that killer drive and work ethic, there's other things that we sacrifice to feed that thing, to feed that beast. And a lot of us end up adopting very unhealthy habits and behaviors to feed that, because it feels good in the short term, or it works in the short term, but it only works for so long.
Right.
And so there's so many entrepreneurs I know who have built up, lifestyles of lack of health actually, and yet are still doing well. But and so the fact is that they're making money, and it's like things are working, but really, are they working? Like, how absolutely exhausted are you? How worn out are you? How often do you feel like you're walking on that tightrope and you have to hold on so tightly or else everything is going to collapse, right? Like, are you really, are you surviving, or are you actually, are you thriving? And I hate that stereotype, but like, how are you practicing sourcing yourself to be the best leader that you are? Or are you not? Are you really just surviving because that's the way that you learned how to do it? And I think the answer for many of us is that we weren't taught how to be an entrepreneur. Like, we just figured it out. And most of us figured it out by working harder than absolutely everybody else and making that our sole obsession in the world, and everything else becoming a second, third, fourth order priority well below that. And so once you accomplish a certain level of success, it's time to start looking at the rest of life, because you can't keep ignoring these crucial elemental human needs like your health and expect to keep succeeding. Right? It becomes about playing the long term, thinking about the order of consequences to your choices, and now start setting the foundation for your lifetime success. And you can't do that, in my opinion, without really working on your health. And, and like we said, your health is so influenced by what you're eating, then that's the best place to start.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to that theme again of sacrificing the long-term benefit for some short-term gain. And what's really ironic about that, I think, in the entrepreneurial community is that we entrepreneurs, we are sort of, we're supposed to be programmed to sacrifice, right? The whole concept of hustling and grinding is about sacrificing some short-term want for some long-term gain, but we're just doing it the wrong way.
Yeah. It's true. So like, our insane work ethic, we have this willingness to sacrifice short-term comforts for long-term ambitions. Right. And so that's the primary source of your success. But like we've been saying, that's also the source of your limitations. Right. Because when you start sacrificing sleep, eating tons of sugar, ordering takeout all the time, over caffeinating to the point of absurdity, not getting up from your desk for an entire day, constantly canceling social plans, numbing out on alcohol or whatever poison that you choose. I mean, that's the trade-off to living an all or nothing lifestyle. And it's certainly admirable. People do it because they're so connected to the thing that they're building, their mission, their clients, their team, whatever. It's admirable, but it's not honorable, because you're not honoring yourself ultimately. And so that's just, that's something that you really are going to have to look at it at some point.
And as you pointed out earlier, and these messages are so misleading where this culture comes from, because, I spent the first 15 years of my career in the high tech space, and it's almost like a joke of the folks who start a tech startup, that they sleep in their car, for the first couple of years to get things off the ground. And recently there were a couple of talks given by, so Mark Zuckerberg gave a talk. There were a couple of other tech leaders that were talking about this sacrifice, this, if you have a dream, you need to put aside your life, your friends, your goal, your short-term goals to get this long-term thing. And it was reinforcing this idea. And I remember having this conversation with someone who said, but how can you argue with these folks, when they've been so successful? And I remarked, the audience for those talks are their employees. They're actually trying to get their employees to sacrifice their life, their goals, their short-term ambitions to achieve their objective. And so there's this very cynical underlying theme behind this hustle and grind culture, which I find really I just I kind of want to shout from the rooftops, that's not the plan. That's not the success plan. That's just someone's cynical view of it.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Always remember, or always distinguish who is the audience that these people are talking to.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, sorry, go for it.
no, I was just going to pivot really quickly because I want to get into how you work with folks and what that process looks like. So, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about what, like, let's take an entrepreneur, and they're looking for peak performance. They are obviously health and diet is a component of it, but you've alluded to some other things as well. Walk us through a little bit about what that process looks like. How are you working with those folks at this point?
Sure. So for my company, EvolutionEat, which is all about creating a lifestyle of health focused on mastering your diets and creating habits in different domains of your life, so very simple habits in different domains of your life to support your global overall success, so that you're, like we said before, learning how to channel those emotional needs, not through eating or whatever unhealthy coping mechanisms you're taking on, but through other things that are important to you. And so I guess let's start there. We have all these emotional needs, and instead of making them wrong, like instead of saying it's wrong for you to feel sad or depressed, that's just being a human. And when you're an entrepreneur, you experience the whole spectrum of emotions all the time,
right?
And like in hyper speed, right? Like how many in 1 week alone you could go through the entire range of human experience and feel complete. So it's not to make those emotions or the emotional need, which is some sort of comfort or relief or stimulation or fulfillment. It's not to make that wrong. We want to honor that. So we want to build habits in your life, simple routines that have you not having to deliberately think about what should I do about this, but have practiced that, have trained that into a lifestyle. So we talk a lot about, simple things, nothing that I say, I'm not Einstein here, but it's about the practice of making this, it's about making this a practice for yourself. Self-mastery is a practice, which means honoring yourself is a practice. Health is a practice. It's not a goal that you accomplish. So most people think about their health as a goal that they're accomplishing, like lose 30 pounds in 30 days or something, which accomplish implies completion, which implies forgetting about. And that's never gonna work. Dieting or trying to accomplish a weight loss goal within a certain time frame and doing a bunch of stuff to satisfy that goal, you might accomplish the goal, but you're never gonna learn. Right? You're not going to learn how to actually make that real for you. So I think of your health as a skill. I think of mastery, peak performance as a skill that you have to practice throughout the course of your entire life, right? So, so we want to construct at various points throughout your day, understanding where your trigger zones are particularly, and really starting there, designing simple habits, simple practices that no matter what, if it's a good day, if it's a bad day, if you're feeling great, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling whatever, that you've committed to. You've committed to this practice, whether that's meditation, whether that's exercise, whether that's calling up somebody that you really care about, certainly eating at consistent times throughout the day. You've committed to that.
Yeah.
So we're helping people design a life of commitment. More often than not, people are living a life designed by circumstances. We have all these circumstances and we react to them, and we might do really well. There are a lot of people who do very well where they're just reacting to things all the time. But there's a limit.
I think partially. I mean, we see some, I think, little windows of that, but I don't think it's a good long-term strategy.
Absolutely not. No, there's a cap to how good it gets, and it's exhausting.
Yeah,
so,
it is exhausting. That is true.
So we want to help people build a life of commitment where they're committed to their business and they're committed to their health, right? And it's not either or. It's not a trade-off. You can be committed to priorities and have principles that hold them up. And so really the most important thing about all this is having an environment that, like an internal and external environment in which you've agreed to enter into that has you bound to that commitment, right? So that's why whether somebody's enrolled in our program at EvolutionEat or it's, it's a one-on-one client who's working with me. Coaching is the modality that we use because it bounds people to relationship and to feeling accepted and acknowledged for who they are, as opposed to projecting who you're supposed to be and trying to like fix all this shit because you think you're supposed to be this way. It's like, if we actually want to build you up, then we have to get utterly clearly honest with who you are right now and focus on that person. So we have all these practices that are designed around being like radically transparent with what's really happening, like sharing that with your coach. So if you're, eating the cookie, right, or eating like sleeves of cookies throughout the day, or you're drinking too much, like sharing that as much as you're sharing the wins, because we have to get radically honest with what's actually going on so that we can actually work on that thing, right? Just as if you were learning how to play an instrument, it would do you no good if you were lying to your teacher and you said, yeah, I got, the chorus of that song, nailing it. And then you show up to practice and you can't play, right? Like we actually, like, if you can't figure out that riff, then you're going to sit down with your instructor and practice it through. You're not going to ignore it or pretend that it's not there. You're going to practice it. And it doesn't mean anything about you as a human being. It doesn't mean that you suck or you're wrong or you're bad or you're stupid or anything. It just means that we need to keep practicing. And that's the thing that separates, I think, in the health space, my companies from anything else that I've seen, is that this is a long-term practice. We absolutely do not sell a short-term solution. There's plenty of that shit out there. I'm not saying it's wrong or bad either, because some people just can never motivate themselves unless they go that route. But ultimately, what you have to do to be successful is build a lifestyle that is designed to get you everything that you want. And that's comprised of habits that are like new things that you're taking on to support that person, but also rewriting those old habits that are keeping you from getting there. Right. And that just takes time and effort and practice. So, so we work with people for a long time. I would love to, I know what you're going to say to me. Our program at EvolutionEat is 6 months long. It is not a 3-month program. Yeah. And the reason for that is, and it's not sexy, is because I have never seen anybody radically change their life in 3 months. Yeah. And I am 100% committed to helping people really change their life. And I do not believe that that's possible in less than 6 months. And so we've created a program that really holds people through that entire experience. That's awesome. Well, no, the one thing you always will hear me say, and I tell everybody this, is that there is no one right way to do anything. Right. There are simply best practices, and there are other situations that have things, show up a little bit differently. So no, I mean, I see a lot of people with 6 month programs, and they are very effective because they're specifically honed in on achieving that objective, and it takes 6 months to do it. There's just no way around it. So yeah. I've toyed with the 3, and it is just something in my soul that won't put up with that. Like I just can't do it. I just can't do it. So no. I've stopped making myself wrong for it. I'm just like, look, this is our way, and we're going to be the company that obsesses about the long term. Like, I'm great with that because it's so different than any other program that I've seen by and large. So like, that's my thing. We're really about helping you focus on the long term and building a lifestyle, which is not just an accomplishment that you get now, but something that you take with you forever. That's my. Well, what you're describing is essentially a process where you're pre-programming, right? This is, you had talked about how important it is to be ready for the moment before it happens. That's essentially pre-programming to make sure that there's a new lifestyle, a new way of behaving in those moments, getting people habits that reinforce that pre-programming, and then immersing people into a culture of radical accountability. I mean, I think that's great. That's a terrific infrastructure. Yeah. Yeah. And it is radical. It's every day. It's every day. So here's our secret sauce. I'm happy to share it. As far as for EvolutionEat, we have you, instead of what doesn't work or what works very poorly, is counting calories, counting macros, obsessing about all that stuff, especially if you're early. So yes, that works if you're already at a certain level of proficiency. So I want to distinguish that. If you're already somebody who's like killing it and you want to get from like good to great or great to excellent,
Yeah.
there's going to be an element, there's going to be a matter of like scientifically studying what you're doing. But for EvolutionEat, as opposed to my one-on-one coaching, let's say, we're here to speak to the general population who by and large is very confused about how to live a life of health and what to do about it all. So when you're at that more like beginner phase of the growth and your learning curve, what we don't want to do is obsess about the micro details that get people all confused.
Yeah.
We want to have a very binary system of knowing, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? And doing this right means you're taking a photo of what you're eating. So we have our members take photographs of every single thing that they eat so that they can start self-coaching themselves. When you take a photograph of what you're eating, it makes you be extremely mindful about your decision-making. And you then can start asking yourself, is that actually what I want? Do I really want to share that with my coach in the group, right? Because it's a group program too. So it's everybody's collaborating on a daily basis and you're showing up for each other. Yeah. And then that element of sharing where it's like, I'm sharing this with people really is confronting, but also has you being accepted as an individual, despite your choices, despite having an ice cream sundae on a Tuesday. It's like, my people still are going to be there for me and support me, even if I make a mistake. And that's really important as well, especially for people who really need help in this area, which there's many of us, because, you know, our relationship with food and eating is intensely intimate and very personal. You know, when you overeat something or eat a bunch of crap, how often is that when you're with other people? I have a hunch it's more often than not late at night by yourself, or scattered throughout the day because you're just like mindlessly going up to the coffee machine and just like eating the chocolates next to it, right? Like it's one or the other, but it's always something that you're just doing by yourself, or more often than not something that's so. That element of sharing and vulnerability and expression and camaraderie, and yes, radical accountability, daily practice where you're tracking your choices. That's it. Are you taking the photo? That means you've opted in. You've opted into the daily practice, and that's it. Over time, I know that you'll start self-coaching yourself to make better choices, not to mention you have a coach and you have a team to also help you with that feedback. But it's like, am I practicing or not? Because with food and diet and all this, we all know that consistency is the number one thing. So this is like, are you being consistent or not? Yes or no? And if you are, it will answer for itself over the long run. That will start to self-regulate. You'll start to make better and better decisions.
Yeah, you've tapped into a dynamic that, because I want to tie this back to where we started the conversation when you talked about food addiction. You've tapped into this dynamic where you've created a culture of acceptance and support, which the scientists have already shown for addiction treatment of any kind is a required element. This community of support, and no matter what decision I make, I'm not going to get abandoned by that support community. They're going to continue to be there, so that as I'm sort of navigating those different choices and trying to figure out how to make it work, I still have my community. So you've tapped into that exact dynamic as whether someone actually has whatever the clinical definition of addiction is, or if they're just trying to become master of their own health, you've established essentially the foundation for success.
Yeah, I like to think that's true. Thank you for acknowledging that.
That's great. Look, Daniel, we are totally out of time, and I really apologize because I would love to talk about this more with you, but I know you're super busy, and I asked for a small commitment of time from you, and you were really gracious to provide that. But before we go, for those folks who are listening that want to connect with you, what's a great place for them to go to get this conversation kicked off with you?
Yeah. So two things. I've created this amazing free course for anybody who really wants to learn our basic principles and our philosophy and start really working on their health at Evolution Eat. If you go to evolutioneat.com/join,
Okay.
then you get the program for free. It's like 5 hours of really awesome content, and there's ways of setting up free coaching calls with me through that. And for anybody who's interested in jump-starting the conversation and you really want to connect around these ideas of mastery and peak performance, and then I'm always happy to just be a resource to you, and also to see where you're at and what's going on. And you can reach out by just emailing directly at daniel@evolutioneat.com and put the name of the podcast in the subject line, and either myself or my assistant will flag that down. So
awesome. That's very generous of you, both with the course and with your time. So thanks very much. And those of you who are watching this, a link will be right below the video. If you're listening via audio, it's on the show notes page. So if you happen to be listening to this out and about, come on over to the show notes page and you can click through directly to that link. Thanks for that generous offer. Really appreciate that, Daniel.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for having me. I know we could talk about this forever, so we'll take it offline, or maybe we'll do a round 2 one day. But
yeah, seriously, I'll come out to LA. We'll hang out. We'll chat.
We'll hang out. We'll eat some green shit, and
there you go.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Yeah,
thank you. So I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening and joining in today on this episode. Really appreciate it. Know you are busy. You got a lot of things you could be doing with your time. So if you choose to listen in, we're honored that you've given us that gift of time. We will be in touch with you, and make sure that I just want to reiterate this element of habit forming and performance that Daniel's talking about. I really think it's the difference between people who long-term can be entrepreneurial and people who just burn out very quickly. I do think it's a critical element. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And thanks again, Daniel, for the offer that's very generous. And we will see you all next time. All right, take care. Bye-bye.